but welcome everyone to today's Automates webinar, What to Know, the strategic shift from Salesforce CPQ to Revenue Cloud Advanced. I'm Em Daigle, founder and chief automation officer at Automates. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are the fastest growing community for accounting and finance professionals who are hungry to modernize workflows with AI and automation. So within the community, we now have over 500 members, kind of an exciting milestone that we just hit. We facilitate collaboration in many different ways, but always with a value-led focus and zero sales pitch. So we offer a Slack space to explore with peers, things like a design partner program where you can help to shape vendor roadmaps and get early access to emerging capabilities. And then exclusive events like today's webinar, where we offer content enablement to really sharpen skills and help you gain some experience. But at the end of the day, our mission is to bring together innovators like yourselves so that you can really help to solve the manual challenges faster, build stronger data foundations, and really influence the future of financial operations and maybe even have some fun while doing it. So today we are proud to partner with Northlight Solutions Group, your guiding light to Salesforce success. I love that tagline. NSG's team of lead to cash experts bring strategic consulting. They have they're able to fully align your lead to cash sales cycle, everything quote to cash in there, implementation know-how, everything from CPQ, billing, Revenue Cloud Advanced, which we're going to learn a little bit more about today, everything with a strategic focus on data readiness to really drive success. And then just the continuous optimization, enablement, making sure that anything you're investing in really scales with your business. So in short, if you think about it, they help companies unleash automation, integrations, data-driven insights across the full Salesforce ecosystem and then beyond. So with that, looking at the agenda, we do have a few housekeeping items. We have a lot of great content to get through during the hour, but in the interest of getting through all of these insights, we do have time allotted for Q&A. Along the way, though, as you have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll address them during that allocated time there at the end. And also, there's so many great slides with great information. No need to feverishly take notes. We'll share the deck with you along with the recording of today's session, so you'll have access to that. And then finally, over the next hour, as you can see here, Amanda, Caroline, and Ben are going to walk us through everything from what is RCA to a case study that I think will really resonate with everyone here. Finally, kind of on a personal note, I'm particularly excited about today's session. I think I've seen firsthand how downstream initiatives can grind to a halt, struggle mightily over time if you haven't properly scoped and addressed any of the upstream data and processes that are so impactful to the downstream process. So when you get that foundation right, you're mapping your products, your pricing rules, your revenue logic, everything else seems to flow seamlessly. And so that's exactly why this amazing Northlight team does everything the best in that capacity. They align the data strategy. They know everything about the technology there to drive success, everything from day one, so that, these are all things you need to consider every step of the way. It's not additive. It's just making sure you're doing it in the right way. So with that, I'm thrilled to hand it over to Amanda, who is the account director at Northlight Solutions Group, who I've had the pleasure of working with in various capacities over the last 8, 9, 10 years, I guess, Amanda.
Yeah.
And so was hoping you could kick us off on intros for you and then the rest of the NSG team.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. As Em mentioned, my name is Amanda. I'm an account director here. My background actually includes finance, revenue accounting, revenue operations. I've been through customer success and many digital transformations, and I've been in the seat of having lived through the pain, automating the pain, and then sharing best practices about the pain that we feel end to end across different applications. So I'm really excited to be here with my team. Ben, I'll kick it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Amanda. And hi, everyone. I appreciate you joining or coming back to the recording. For those of you that will review this offline, Ben Appa, partner here at Northlight or NSG, but also the Revenue Cloud practice leader. I live in the Atlanta area, but I'm born and raised in South Florida. I'm very proud of my Florida Panthers back-to-back championship in hockey. But I started out in Salesforce as a business owner and admin for the platform. I really wasn't purely in tech. I was actually in sales. I led an inside and outside sales team using Salesforce in the HLS space. And I loved it enough that I've been helping other companies do this really for the last 16 plus years. For the last 10 years or so, I've been heavily focused on quote to cash. Some of my earliest days in CPQ were in Aptus CPQ, SteelBrick. I've been a part of some Oracle Big Machines migrations. And these are some platforms that some of you may or may not have had experience with in the past. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But and really we pride ourselves on helping companies build quote to cash solutions that really make a difference to the business value outcomes that we're always striving to achieve. And so with that, I will turn it over to Caroline for a brief intro.
Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Adams. I am a senior solution architect at Northlight Solutions Group. My background as of the last maybe 8 years or so was specifically in doing CPQ implementation. So I really drive the kind of discussions of seeing what you want to get out of the system, and have really been diving into RCA for, let's say, about the last year or so to really learn that functionality and become the pro in that. So I'm really excited to talk about it. RCA is really cool and really kind of the future technology. I'm excited to talk more to you guys. Nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Caroline. All right, back to you, Em.
All right, fabulous. Well, I'm sure everybody's chomping at the bit if they don't know more about RCA. So, most people in our Automates community and companies we've worked with have Salesforce CRM and or CPQ or some automated form of quoting. The big drum roll here, Ben. Are the rumors true? Is CPQ going away? And what the heck is RCA?
Mm-hmm. Fantastic question. I love this question. I've heard that one plenty. And so what I prepared for us to talk through that, I think, is the easiest way is to take you through the history. Briefly, I promise it's not a history lesson of CPQ in the Salesforce ecosystem to kind of set up what it is today. So if you haven't heard of SteelBrick CPQ before, it happens to be the origin story for legacy CPQ as many of the existing customers of Salesforce CPQ use today. It is this packaged Salesforce CPQ item. And it came from a third-party package previously known as Quote Quickly. It was built on the Salesforce platform back in the early 2000s, really. It was released via App Exchange by a company called SteelBrick. And at that time, it was released in competition with many other third-party tool sets. Some of the ones I just mentioned, Oracle Big Machines and Aptus CPQ, to name a couple. Some of the folks that brought us Quote Quickly, coincidentally, were pioneers or legacies from those platforms or other best-in-class CPQ solutions. And not coincidentally, have also gone on to other, CPQ and RevOps and product to cash solutions of today. Um, Quote Quickly was later renamed to SteelBrick CPQ within their own company ecosystem, and they would eventually add billing capabilities through its acquisition of Invoice IT. Then, in a bold turn of events, Salesforce chooses SteelBrick as its foray into the native branded CPQ capabilities on platform in Salesforce, relabeling its product as Salesforce CPQ through an acquisition. So prior to this, much of the platform framework for CPQ either required one of these third-party apps or some heavy customization of like a Salesforce Sales Cloud or a combination of spreadsheets and bespoke systems, et cetera. So as such, this product gained a pretty rapid and heavy amount of traction out of the gate, rounding out nicely Salesforce's footprint in the quote to cash software solution space. 2 years later, Salesforce Billing 2.0 is released, further cementing its broader quote to cash capabilities. And so over the course of these few years, Salesforce CPQ really takes a massive share of the CPQ footprint in the CRM ecosystem. They edged out much of their competition to a great extent, but business evolves, and so do companies' go-to-market and pricing strategies, as we've seen over time. Selling models are reimagined and expanded. Industry-specific needs crop up. A heavy shift to that recurring SaaS model framework or consumption-based billing. Hence, Salesforce CPQ rebrands to Revenue Cloud, which it still is today, to be clear, and we'll provide detail on this. But they start to explore other ways to improve its extensibility across verticals and changing business landscapes. Velocity is required to support its Salesforce Industries framework. And then Salesforce starts to introduce new products, a standalone subscription management module, COM, and a few other tool sets to better support the booming trend towards those recurring revenue models, customer success, omni-channel sales. Really, all of these should be seen as stepping stones leading up to today's version of Salesforce Revenue Cloud. Its latest flagship product is Revenue Cloud Advanced, which we'll talk a good bit about today. Was introduced initially as Revenue Lifecycle Management, or RLM. You may see some documentation in some places that speak to RLM or Revenue Lifecycle Management. Now you have context of the origin and why it was called that. But truthfully, it's known today as Revenue Cloud Advanced, or RCA, as I'll refer to it frequently to save words. So it's a reimagined, entirely native platform framework. It was built to transcend the limits of its prior version products. But now that we talked about the history, it did also incorporate some of the best concepts and frameworks of each. So RCA was released really as a generally available product in February of last year. It was on the market for just over a year when Salesforce decided to announce that the legacy version of RevCloud products, Salesforce CPQ and Salesforce Billing, are in the end of sale state. So they're available products for existing customer renewals only. So anybody that has CPQ licenses already can continue to renew and will continue to get product support. All new CPQ customers will be sold the prospect of a transformative product to cash RevOps solution, which is Revenue Cloud Advanced. All of these components, even though part of them are end of sale and part of them are new, and really, for all of the new customers or those looking to take their RevOps solutions to the next step, they all make up the Revenue Cloud product suite. So hopefully that summarizes and provides some context around what's Revenue Cloud, what's CPQ, and then what's Revenue Cloud Advanced. But just to talk a little bit more now about what is behind the curtains of Revenue Cloud Advanced. And I know that was a long-winded setup, and I appreciate you all bearing with me. So understanding where it came from really sets up what it is. As I just touched on, the history of CPQ, the fact that many of the solutions, not just steel bricks, were all limited by a managed package framework and kind of legacy modules, if you will. It prevented some seamless configuration and the go-to-market speed that today's businesses demand. So Salesforce RCA is really set to reset the tables for RevOps, particularly in the CRM and Salesforce ecosystem. It's an entirely configurable solution on the Einstein 1 platform. So really, just to put it plainly, what you're familiar with today, if you know Salesforce, right? Using much of the tool sets we're familiar with, building a composable framework that's extensible for more robust RevOps solutions and business intelligence. That sounds like a bunch of consulting or tech jargon, and I apologize, but what does it mean? It means that people that administer Sales Cloud and Service Cloud today, people that manage products and their go-to-market strategy or the sales processes, ops users that manage orders and contracts, they're all going to be more familiar and feel more at home with some of the basic concepts of Revenue Cloud. It also means it's provided a building block framework, so one where we can establish a structure for go-to-market product and pricing models, favorite, clone, and refine them. we can take some of that same infrastructure and in just clicks, not code, expose these solutions to other channels such as a customer portal or a commerce engine or a partner marketplace or some sort of homegrown product solutions. And there's many more of today, as you guys are aware. So it also provides some additional tool sets to cement its maturity as a truly product to cash framework. So why product to cash and what does this mean? For instance, we have the product catalog management framework. So you have catalogs and product classifications and category structures to reflect all of that taxonomy of a clean product master. So it enables product managers to quickly introduce new solution offerings with rapid speed. This new framework provides improved product search and discovery capabilities. It allows you to intuitively guide sales to build out those solutions. And it provides inherently improved adoption through the familiarity of the platform interface and the fact that, again, it's a lot of the same standard constructs that traditional Sales Cloud users would have seen and already been introduced to. So all of this really means that revenue teams can now go to market quicker and evolve their solutions much more rapidly than ever before, which is really what today's business demands, at least if you're trying to differentiate and set yourself apart from the competition. So, and then layer in some other tools just to touch briefly. Dynamic Revenue Orchestrator. We can solve use cases that often required customization. So for any of those folks on the call that have experienced pains with how do I tie fulfillment activities to billing activities to customer success and install base activities, et cetera, there is a whole new tool set. Think of when fulfillment drives billing or asset actions drive billing or any combination of scenarios that you can use to build these fulfillment plans. You can structure and strategize around having a commercial product base and a technical product base. So in situations where you have complex product solutions, you can blow those out to drive fulfillment activities without confusing your sales users and without confusing your finance users or your RevOps personas. And then you can use this DRO, this dynamic revenue orchestrator, to more seamlessly interface with other RevOps tools to drive those billing and fulfillment activities or those customer success activities. And because of the open API that's listed here, right, the data passed through to all these systems is easier to manage as well. Salesforce led with a massive manual on all of the levers that could just put somebody to sleep if they're not interested in the technical stuff. But it's amazing for the folks that need to go build this platform and know that they have access to pull any lever that they really need to drive a process or an outcome that's specific to their business and setting themselves apart from the competition. So the flexibility is immensely improved with this framework. And then just taking it one step further, okay, so now we've talked a little bit about Sales Cloud and what CPQ was and now what Revenue Cloud is. I touched on the fact that Revenue Cloud takes advantage of more of the standard framework that you're familiar with today. And this is really meant to illustrate that, how it fits the broader customer framework. I'd like to set up first this concept of lead to loyalty, right? Because this is really foundational to how we might execute a revenue ops initiative or engagement or transformation for a number of businesses. And really this accounts for what happens from the time of lead all the way through that customer loyalty outcome, right? Because this is a session focused on revenue operations, I'm going to focus on just that, revenue operations, but know that there's a full set of activities, as you see illustrated by those chevrons, that go into solidifying an end-to-end solution where process and platform marry together in a way that adds the most optimal business value framework for your business and your customers cradle to grave. That said, a full-scale revenue ops solution in Salesforce does not live without some very foundational elements of Sales Cloud Core. You see those light blue areas because RCA leverages those pieces so fluidly comparative to some of the other legacy CPQ products, not even just Salesforce's, but all those other kind of tack on third-party packages. We can now phase a release of a full-scale RevOps solution in stages, right? Implementing or optimizing the foundational layers of of account and product management, establishing a quoting and order management process, and then automating elements of the install base maintenance as a lead up to an RCA implementation. Without RCA, though, you'll be limited in many areas of RevOps processes and automation, as you see highlighted in those dark blue areas, starting with some of the product and revenue orchestration capabilities we just discussed, but also many of the modules that govern and automate the rev cycle processes. So for instance, you see, down there the cost and the price and the rate card schedules. Those allow really capabilities in pricing and go-to-market to support a myriad of models that may have been difficult in some legacy CPQ solutions, including a very heavy, robust feature set for consumption-based quoting and billing. Here you'll also see those fulfillment orders and fulfillment plans that we just talked about fit into the data model. This is really only a very high-level summary view of a super powerful tool set that today's business models need support with. Further to the right, you see modules for more robust approvals management, standing up things like a deal desk and approval automation and visual approval indicators to allow more seamless governance of the quote lifecycle. And really these tool sets now in this Revenue Cloud framework are a lot more seamless to set up and maintain visually as well. We also see DocGen capabilities. I mean, this is always an essential part of configure price quote, right? This is a unique feature, though, whereby licensed users now have access to a few different DocGen tools, including elements of contract lifecycle management, again, on the Salesforce platform framework. So it gives more granular control over things like clause libraries, dynamic contract language, contract approvals, and some redlining capabilities. And then for businesses with less robust models, Doc Builder gives you plenty of flexibility to establish governed templates, automated merge field output from the quote with integration for e-signature. And then asset lifecycle management. So it's another newly imagined capability. It's somewhat iterated and optimized from that COM framework that some users might have experienced previously, which is customer asset lifecycle management. But really what it means is that all of the install base or applicable sold good items that have been fulfilled can now be memorialized as an asset record with a view and history of all of the actions that have been performed against it. Again, it's a very visually appealing module. This isn't a technically heavy presentation. It's not meant to be, but happy, in future sessions and follow-up to kind of show like how this appeals and drives user adoption to manage the customer lifecycle for any number of users, sales support, or a customer success team. We can amend and renew assets without the header of a contract record. We can bring assets into new business or upsell quotes on the fly without having to go and find them, right? We can make changes against our install base without even needing a quote or an opportunity when it makes sense, right? Like let's say in self-service scenarios or commerce scenarios. So these are only just some of the key modules of the RCA framework, and they don't actually include any of the new billing and finance accounting modules that are available in Revenue Cloud Billing. But we will touch a little bit on those, but really what this sets up is a framework for how we can see these types of solutions released in kind of a crawl, walk, run approach.
I love this. And I think what this does, I appreciate the visual here and then the chevrons across the top, because I think everybody listening in can appreciate all of the different touch points on those cross-functional teams that impact the downstream data that as finance and accounting professionals, we sort of like inherit, I'll say, and don't always have the luxury of having this level of visibility or understanding on it. But what I love about this, though, is the deep understanding you have on this, but like how it all plays together, and if set up properly, can really help the downstream system flow much more easily because you're capturing all of these touch points along the way. And so now that we kind of like understand, well, what it is, where it fits, and then where it can kind of enhance some of these processes. My next question is, what does the impact to the business look like? And then understanding that, like what can we think about being prioritized? Because it feels big. Like, walk me through what that looks like a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. That's another great question I love to answer. It's such a great question that it's really helped shape the foundation for how I've seen successful executions over the last 100 or 2 engagements, right, in various capacities of the resources I've worked with in quote to cash or lead to cash solutions. If there's any one thing I can impress upon the folks here or the folks that are going to come back and listen to this is that for those interested in how to execute successfully a quote to cash implementation, a CPQ build or optimization, a billing build or optimization, or even a full scale lead to loyalty transformation, it really should start with these guiding principles, and you really need to try and remain as absolute in your adherence to these throughout. Every single time I've seen a poor implementation, which is the reason why these have refined just a little bit over the years, you can bet that some of these key rules were ignored or marginalized to some or to a great extent. So taking the example of the 80/20 rule, it originates from the Pareto principle. It has really many applications in business and finance, but quite simply just means don't focus on the edge cases, right? Tackle those where you can, when you can, but later. Focus on the 80% of your business, typically starting with volume, but then you consider your users and the number of users in the system and your revenue and the impacts to that. But ensure you're going to realize the most business value for your efforts in an initial lift. No company, especially today, has an unlimited budget to go and implement the greatest, lead to loyalty solution that's most transformative out of the gate. And it's really not the right way to do it. Playing hand in glove to this is to transform and leverage out of the box principles. So together, say that you must evaluate what is best for your business, not from what you do today, but from what your goals and objectives are, and then leverage the best fit platform to do this with its out of the box capabilities as much as possible. There's always some varying degrees to the extent of customization that you may allow or demand and need, but this is where an experienced advisor or an implementation partner can guide you. To do what I said, though, you need to identify your objectives, right? So kind of stepping down the list, in order to do this, you need executive alignment and leadership direction to ensure that those objectives align with the business value outcomes for the given engagement. What do you want to get out of it? Summarize really best in no more than maybe 3 to 5 highest priority goals, maybe 6, right? Depending upon how big and transformative this is. Those can be always broken down to granular levels at a persona basis. But if you had to interview each of the executives or C-suite stakeholders in your business that this is going to impact, quote to cash, even lead to cash especially, you need them to say, hey, what's your top 1 or your top 2? And you create a list and you create a vision, you create a roadmap. These last 3 principles have really been refined and or appended over the years, but I found to be just as equally important. Through the use of your executive sponsors and a balanced stakeholder framework, you're going to build a governance structure on which to execute, right? Really, the goal here is to make sure you're staying principled, and I'll elaborate. This is where you often find things go awry when you're expecting quick wins in a short period of time, when years of technical or process debt have accumulated. Trying to get more functionality in a tight timeline, expecting it to be achievable by just throwing more resources at it, is typically not the right way to look at this, right? There are opportunities for quick wins, and we'll talk about how we've approached some of that previously. But you don't want to customize a solution just to accommodate a process today that isn't best practice just because it's easier in the timeline you have, right? Use a trusted advisor to guide you here. When you can take a risk or make an exception, or you should, listen to them, right? If you should not, definitely listen to them. And so we'll touch on these a little bit as we talk about like ways to implement and keep yourself governed, but these are crucial to success. If there's only one slide in all of this, it seems so maybe simple and fundamental, but truthfully, following these is the roadmap to success. And when these things are ignored, that's where we see some of those failures.
Thanks, Ben, for walking us through that. It's definitely crucial to think about these guiding principles. And as we listen to what you're sharing, what comes to mind is those embarking on this journey for the first time. Could you speak to what a readiness assessment could look like, and how to identify complexity and considerations for budget planning? Because a lot of people are probably thinking, okay, this is great, but I'm team of one, and there's a lot of people I kind of have to align with. But how do I know how to catch what's complex, and where I need to dive next, or pull the resources that can help guide this to the next level? Do you mind spending a little bit of time on that?
Sure. No, that's great. So, I think, again, doing some of those guiding principles, grounding framework out of the gate really helps set you up for then how you execute. But once you've established those ground rules and the framework for execution, that's really where the rubber hits the road. And there's a few different ways to look at this. Can you dive right in and start with some discovery and do some design and kind of just try and build and iterate in a super agile fashion? Yes. But with these types of implementations, because they touch so many persona groups, they tend to be to have the most widespread impact across an organization, facing some of the more complex aspects of an organization's business processes. We really suggest a comprehensive look at your business's lead to cash landscape. Understanding the ties of data, and data is king, you're going to hear me say it, from lead source conception through revenue accounting and customer success. Ideally, you have an implementation partner to help assess with the level of complexity and readiness in the areas. So really what you see here is something that we like to help our customers kind of walk through, make sure we're transforming, we're leveraging those out of the box solutions, and we brought in the right stakeholders to drive those conversations. This is really a comparative look between a foundational initial phase release of Revenue Cloud Advance for an organization with some moderately heavy levels of process and data depth, as well as some relatively complex back office orchestration demands based on their product and how they deliver, right? So in completing this work up front, we're able to ensure we're adhering to our guiding principles just discussed, most notably transformation, not lifting and shifting those processes, empowering the collective team to be a part of that and to be galvanized towards what the solution will be in that vision and roadmap, and making sure you're not just customizing out of the gate, you're really optimizing the out of the box capabilities, and you're saving those customizations if they're ever necessary when they don't apply to that 80/20, right? So really leaning on those guiding principles. Key areas I'd like to call out, very notably, of course, and I think a lot of organizations can relate to this: product vision and strategy. It's a fairly, not even fairly, very critical foundational element to a successful RevOps engagement. It's also a very common area for us to see varying degrees of complexity. So depending on the nature of your company's product solutions, the complexity of configurability for those solutions, the size of the product catalog, and the level of maturity of your product framework already, including what the taxonomies are for your product, how those products relate to each other, what the product master looks like, and where it lives. You need to spend the time necessary to ensure your product and pricing framework align to the powerful capabilities of the tool and your go-to-market models, especially knowing that Revenue Cloud Advance is really a product to cash solution. It doesn't just start at quote. And a lot of the value you're going to get out of this and the velocity you get when you go to release solutions and release this product to your business comes from setting this up foundationally. The next one, and maybe this is just as parallel or more in terms of paramount importance, complexity in the areas of data. So establishing a sound data framework for not only the master data elements, but also any legacy transactional data that's necessary at the time of go live can be heavily impactful to the scope of build. So starting with a sound customer master and account data structures, ensuring you have a backdrop of data governance to maintain it. Don't also overlook the complexities of your legacy contract and asset data and even how it relates to that account master framework. Because the data model of a new revenue cloud solution, no matter which it is, especially if you're operating on spreadsheets or a combination of bespoke solutions, right? It's not going to match your legacy data model. That, what we're implementing will not match your legacy data model. So some good planning and effort should go into what this cutover looks like in these areas, and transforming any migrated data that you plan to consume in the new Rev Cloud framework is also crucial, right? Like, you will not be able to necessarily leverage some of that asset lifecycle management, renewal amendment capabilities against that legacy active asset install base contract data without some level of planning and potentially even transformation of those data elements. So I really can't stress enough how critical it is to get data right. Or again, as I like to say, data is king. Um, Creating a unified process for selling is very important, and sometimes you can find opportunities to phase your release based on, hey, let's accommodate new business selling motions in this phase, or new and renewal will save some amendment cases. And this is depending upon the complexity of your company, but really just making sure that, we're in the case of implementations we've come in and found, or solutions we need to fix. It's like we far too often see too much overhead created in maintaining unique processes unnecessarily. Page layouts and data views, process validations, all this stuff that's proliferated from sales teams or technical debt. It's really helpful to determine also if there's multiple sales channels or sales teams that are going to be involved as part of the first release, or can we phase some of those things out as we try and get business value sooner. And then we've talked about order orchestration a good bit because it's such a powerful element of Revenue Cloud Advance. It gives you the ability to do things we couldn't do before. This is especially an area you don't want to lift and shift. We need to reimagine the process for what the system can support. With their very robust framework, seeing where your business is at and leveraging this framework, or being able to leverage this framework, is crucial to the initial ongoing success of the engagement. Knowing, am I going to get some of those feature capabilities as part of a crawl stage, or is that a walk stage, or is that a run stage, right? And then that kind of goes very much so hand in hand with interfacing and integrations. We've all been daunted by the concept of integrations and how to ensure we get the most perfect implementation doesn't break when we've turned on messaging between platforms. So assessment of your touch points, critical elements that impact success, such as data volumes, frequency, and your platform tech stack. Does it fit your business and the interfaces in your ecosystem? We help guide with all of these kind of readiness items. And regardless of how you decide to go on this journey, these are all areas that you should heavily consider, and make sure you have the right stakeholder involvement to drive that preparation, gearing up for an implementation. And then kind of taking that one step further, right? So coming out of your preparedness activities, you should really be set with a vision for how you're going to move forward and execute. As mentioned, we strongly consider, proceeding with a crawl, walk, run approach. This may and most likely will look somewhat different for every business, depending on their maturity, your market, the appetite for upfront investment in preparation. But being measured in your approach to release is critical regardless. Stay principled. Remember, leverage your executive leaders to drive the vision for execution and business value outcomes. Know what the metrics are that are attached to those business outcomes. This example specifically is very close to what we'd call a default phased approach. So establishing an optimized sales cloud and data framework, data is king, possibly with any initial foundational release of RCA. The initial release would ensure you have the right set of product, pricing, and solution bundle framework for your early release goals, quote lifecycle governance and analytics, and then baseline RevOps business intelligence at a minimum. What are those key APIs that, like, I just don't have insights to today that I want to get out of the gate? Carrying the same example forward, a phase 2 walk release would likely be built to potentially suit maybe multiple sales teams, selling motions, and even multiple sales channels. When we say multiple sales channels, again, think that you may not only have your sales teams leading the sale, but you could have a partner-led selling motion, or customer self-service through a portal, commerce or product-led growth. The latter sales channels tend to be complex and more of a run phase release, but RCA opens up some much more extensible support for these models in any facet, depending upon what you need as part of that initial release. This is also commonly where we see advanced sales agreement outputs, robust back office integrations, and often some of those more labor intensive data cleanup and migration activities. And then by the time we get to a run phase, we're not only prepared for omni-channel sales, but we can amp up the sales-led motion with advanced guided selling, potentially the use of quoting agents. And really, I know this is a hot topic for today that people may have questions on, but it's like, how do I incorporate the use of AI? How do I give more time back to my sales and my sales ops team? So being able to leverage those sorts of things really come from setting up some of the foundational elements in that crawl walk approach. Um, and then if it wasn't prioritized in an earlier release, it's a good time to explore billing capabilities of the platform. RCA is very adept at supporting recurring and consumption-based billing, whereas some other legacy billing solutions may have fallen short. So we can integrate payment gateways, automate invoice generation, and even establish transaction journals, AR subledger, and some very robust RevOps BI. So this phased approach is most useful when laid out ahead of time and all the stakeholders know what to expect, right? This is also where we begin being diligent in defining the highest business objectives early on and ensuring you're adhering to those primary business cases can pay dividends in outlining your roadmap to success.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. All of that is incredibly valuable, and we really appreciate you walking through that, especially because there are going to be different companies at different stages of their growth journey, or even just starting points of considering a new automation project or implementation. So these things are really important to keep in mind. But where we're going next is we prepared an exciting case study that we're going to share with the audience today, one that outlines the challenges, solutions, and complexity across a company's tech stack while also merging organizations. Our case study will highlight key considerations for design and implementation of RCA. And before you go into it, Ben, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the questions that are coming in the chat. Thank you so much. Keep them coming. We're making note of them. We hope to have time to answer them at the end of this next slide. But if we don't, please rest assured that we're going to follow up with some answers. So Ben, with that, why don't you kick off our case study?
Definitely. Sounds great. Thanks. So I think, now that you've had a high level understanding of RCA, where it came from, and the foundational framework for how to achieve an optimal RevOps solution in Salesforce, we want to cement that understanding by relating it all back to what we learned to a real life example, right? So the one we're going to use today is for an auto tech company that we partnered with now for some time through a multi-phase engagement of release. They're growing quickly. They have lofty revenue targets, fueled heavily by product expansion and acquisitions. So following one of their latest large acquisitions and reckoning with their needs to scale for growth quickly, they agreed with a strategy to unify platform and processes. But before I dive into that, it's important to understand how this started, right? So we started with this client in a quick wins engagement style, right? So as an existing Salesforce shop, they were leveraging Sales Cloud with Sage Intacct for revenue cycle processes. There were pains in data integration and reconciliation of month end and business close, heavy manual processes in sales ops and finance. The urgency of need had us dive immediately into finding opportunities for data, process, and system integration optimization. But it also expanded opportunities and fit for broader scale quote to cash infrastructure. And this is where I talk about, yes, we will identify those opportunities to give you pressure valve relief, if you will, but staying disciplined and not moving too quick and understanding where you can and should go next is critical. After our quick wins engagement, we shored up manual processes, mitigated some of those fiscal close pains, and then attempted to ready them for a potential CPQ engagement. During this period, a large acquisition occurred, right? Bringing in another organization into the fold with an existing tech stack of Salesforce Sales Cloud, CPQ, and Great Plains. So all of this kind of had us do a little bit of an about face just to do a broader assessment, a readiness engagement really centered around the lead to cash readiness assessment topics we just covered a little bit ago. We led through a discovery and assessment of readiness across all key elements of their business, ultimately netting them some key findings for decision. One was that both orgs had a heavy amount of technical debt, right? Raising question of org strategy. Another was that some of the elements of process gaps and misalignment between business teams were going to lead to some slowdowns as we executed if we didn't gain that alignment. And then the client faced a number of platform decisions, including tech stack consolidation, org assessment, like where do we fit, which org is the one we use, et cetera, product fit gap to need, and really system infrastructure gaps around data and integration. So we collaboratively discussed and remediated these gaps together with the client. We ultimately provided a roadmap for execution, ensuring we had key program charter elements, those objectives, right, to shape the governance framework, and then provided a full solution design readout with a prioritized user story backlog and platform assessment and recommendations. In the end, the solution path would include an entirely fresh Salesforce ecosystem for both orgs. Something, that a lot of times customers are just immediately turned off to the idea of what I'm going to put all of this in a new org. Why? That seems like so counterintuitive and so heavy. But when you look at traversing account and opportunity data models that have 500 or 1,000 field custom field deep on your data layers, when you look at core data in both platforms and a heavy amount of automation that no longer applies to a unified process framework, you spend more time traversing all of that and optimizing or deciding what to delete and doing regression testing that sometimes it just makes sense to consider a new org framework. So that's ultimately what we led with, but also netted in a new Revenue Cloud Advanced as their reimagined solution for quoting and order orchestration, along with a consolidated back office framework and Sage Intacct for billing and financial accounting. So a number of deliverables and outputs stood as the foundation for our recommendation and ultimate decision. But in the end, our guiding principles were the beacon of navigation through this. And really, we took a structured approach of going through that strategy alignment, which included that process maturity and readiness assessment, performing that application and integration analysis and identifying those notable complexities to impact that assessment, and then performing a data analysis, right? Touching on those key data areas to make sure we had a fully documented and well-aligned solution that all of the key stakeholders and executives could be aligned to. And that ultimately led to a rollout plan and an engagement strategy that we're executing on. We're close to the end of build and very close to seeing some really transformative success. This is the lead to loyalty transformation for this team, and it's only the start of some very awesome things to come in their future. So.
This is awesome. And I think I kind of mentioned earlier, and I know I had the benefit of access to and kind of understanding the case study in advance, but I think the basic principles around all of this can resonate with folks outside of just like an M&A type of situation as well. Like so many times we have these disparate systems, you're trying to align the data, all of those things really need to come together to make sure that that full lead to loyalty, I'll say process, really does.
The vision, it comes to life.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Yep. So I appreciate it. And Ben, this was awesome. I think we have the ability to break this out into many other sessions if we want to and dive in a little bit more, which I'm sure everybody would love to. In the interest of time, though, we've heard about best practices, right? We have a case study with these cross-functional dependencies, complex data models. Now, Caroline and Amanda, can you help everyone listening understand maybe like the key takeaways to how everyone who's listening can really start to build a business case when taking something like this on within their own organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Ben mentioned, right, there's a lot of great ways to approach this. Uncovering complexity is a part of it, but something that I wanted to highlight is this is an opportunity not just to focus on the area that you're responsible for or that you're overseeing, but really just cross-functionally. Because as you saw in some of the earlier slides, there are a lot of different processes before and after in the context of RCA that are involved. And as we think about the value that the data plays in how we go to market, how we package and price our products and services, how we account for them, and ultimately how we report for them, and all that information flows down to the ERP, there's a lot of complexity today in people's business processes where you can identify those gaps and leverage the opportunity to upgrade to RCA to solve for those gaps and really think about them holistically. Aligning with stakeholder objectives that's been covered throughout the presentation is key, not just from leadership, but also from the business users. The data is leveraged by different people in different departments in different ways, but everything really is a connected journey. So really understanding how people need to leverage the information and how you can optimize those processes along the way is going to be a product and a result of you spending the time to think through this and document it. And then, of course, having a value-based approach. We can't boil the ocean, but we want to ensure that you have an opportunity to prioritize, to outline MVP. And sometimes everything is important, and everything is important all at once because everyone is feeling the pain, and those things are valid. But understanding dependencies and where you can tackle things that are going to help alleviate other areas slowly but surely is also part of the strategy. I know that we've had some questions coming in, and so this is the perfect time to tag in my colleague, Caroline, to address some of those. So back to you.
Okay, perfect. Before, so I got one in the private chat, and I'm not going to out anybody here, but Caroline would love to start with this one because I think it's important to capture. And the question is, how important really is the readiness assessment? Obviously, it's very, but just before I tee you up to answer this here in the final minutes, and we will make sure we get all of the questions answered, but we'll get all of you those answers as well. It won't just be the one-offs. But when it comes to asking about how important is the readiness assessment, I feel like if I can just quickly say something and then have you answer, I've been part of so many different initiatives on the downstream systems with accounting and finance and all of that. And the readiness assessment piece isn't necessarily additive. You're going to go through that process in some capacity. Unfortunately, sometimes it's always done like later on as a need. So it's that necessity that drives it. But so maybe I can like reframe the question a little bit on rather than how important is the readiness assessment, but how important is it to do the readiness assessment before you kick off the project?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is a great question. I think we kind of filtered in, Ben and Amanda and yourself filtered this in throughout on just the value of kind of knowing what you want to get out of the system. And the readiness assessment really is kind of the forefront of that, to your point. Doing that right away is important for the data quality. It's important for ensuring that the system is set up like you intend. And I also want to point out that I know Ben had a whole slide about it. And if everybody, picked up on this, RCA is kind of more vast than potentially other tools that you may have implemented in the past. There are a lot more business functions that it'll touch. And so it's really important to kind of understand gaps and dependencies and some of the potential areas that you're going to need to upgrade or enhance very early on, just to ensure that you're making the most of your time while you're implementing these new tools. So kind of addressing those early and often, I would say, is really critical for the readiness assessment is usually upfront, do it right away.
Yeah, exactly. I think to your point, like it's not a how important is it? It's just like make sure you prioritize it and kick that off so you're going through and scoping it accurately because you're going to have to address all of those things.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so then I guess one other question that I just had quickly, and then I promise we'll get to the other ones and we'll probably get to them all after and make sure you all have access to those. But when we think about how the discovery and design process might be different than like what we've already done for CPQ, like how would you think about it being different in like now today's world or to do it differently based on like learnings that everyone's kind of had?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll touch on again the just scope or the broad spectrum, if you will, that RCA will touch again is the kind of the biggest difference, in my opinion, from what you may have done before for CPQ. I think the good news is that you can, if you are a CPQ user, you can use a lot of the knowledge that you have on that tool, and a lot of the things you've set up already could be, you know, transferable. But I think, to Ben's point, it's really important to make sure that you're not just lifting and shifting, but you're transforming. RCA is a new tool. It's new technology. There are functions in there that I've had to learn new. It's a new, very, very advanced tool. And so it's not going to lift and shift the same as CPQ. I think it's going to do more, and you can expect that it can kind of tie together those processes a lot more seamlessly versus CPQ kind of being a standalone product that tied also well with all these other you know, business objectives. RCA contains a lot more. And so you'll see the approach to implementing RCA versus CPQ will take a lot more of your stakeholders' inputs and opinions, and a lot more of your, you know, your onboarding and your order fulfillment and your finance teams are all going to need to be involved to make sure that those processes are working together seamlessly. So I think it would just take more more of your business heads involved, and that would be kind of the critical, one of the big differences between the CPQ assessment and RCA.
I love it though. I think there's so much opportunity here. So it's really
Absolutely.
exciting. Also, hence why I didn't want to like rush through these questions. I think they're really beneficial, and maybe it's even an add-on session that we can go through and do these in more detail. We'll certainly make sure that you all have access to the answers, but I think it might prompt like another session to dive a little deeper on each one of those things, because there's so much possibility. And I think that's really exciting for everybody in that lead to cash cycle, just to make sure that everybody is getting the full benefit out of it. So with
Yeah.
that, Ben, Caroline, Amanda, I want to thank you all and the rest of the NSG team. This was awesome. I hope everybody else got as much out of it as I did. We will certainly provide the slides, the recording, the answers to the questions in the chat. Thank you for putting all of those in. And then I'm going to also include some questions to those as well, so that maybe we can like tee up the next sessions as well. That could be helpful to everybody, kind of dig another layer deeper. So thank you to everyone, and look forward to having you all in the next one.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.